I've noticed that it's going to be 10 years between novels for me, between my new novel, The Buried Giant, and my last one, Never Let Me Go. It comes as a bit of a shock, and I feel I need an alibi of sorts, and here it comes. I blame my wife. I was getting on quite happily with this novel, and I'd written, maybe I think about 70, 80 kind of finished pages, and I was rather pleased with it, so I thought I'd let my wife, Lorna, have a look at it, and she had a look at it and said, look, this is awful. You cannot publish this. This just will not do. You can't even revise it. You're going to have to abandon it, start from scratch. That's very disheartening. You have to admit. I've been doing this for some time, and so I did. After a little bit of a kind of emotional struggle, I decided to take her good advice, and I abandoned the whole thing, and I had to start again right from the beginning, right from scratch, rebuild the whole thing again. And this was such a distressing experience that I had to go away and do something else for a little while. I wrote some song lyrics for my friend jazz singer Stacey Kent, and I helped people make a movie and things like this. And then I came back to it kind of refreshed, and I rebuilt it from the ground up, and I tell you, it was very nerve-wracking when I showed it to her. I decided not to show it to her until I more or less finished it this time. It was very nerve-wracking, but she said, okay, this time you can go ahead with this. So here we are, 10 years later, going to publish The Buried Giant. Here's a question. When is it better to remember, and when is it better to forget? I'm referring mainly to kind of like uncomfortable memories from the past. If you dwell too much on uncomfortable things from the past and rack your conscience about things, it starts to damage the present, starts to damage the future. You start to damage the people around you. And yet, if you refuse to look at things you've done in the past too much, this will lead to problems as well. So I think this is a key question that most of us face frequently at different points in our lives. When is it better just to forget and just move on with life? And when do we really need to look back and be honest and face the past? Now, what I find interesting, I've always found that question very interesting, and I spent a lot of my writing life asking that question in novels. But I've also been very interested in the parallel question, which is how do societies, how do nations, how do communities remember and forget? When is it better for a society to leave its troubled past behind and move on? And when is it better to look back and face some deeply disturbing things that a community or country has done in the past? That same question, when should we remember, when should we forget? That's always fascinated me at the societal level as well as at the individual level. And in my new book, The Buried Giant, I've tried to tackle that question at both levels for the first time, I think. And I think that, of course, they are parallel questions, but they're not the same question. I think there are key and fascinating differences in the way that a country remembers and forgets, and the way an individual remembers and forgets. If we all think about that, I think it becomes clear. Even the questions, but how does a country or society remember? What are the mechanics? Where are the memory banks? Who controls them in a society? How do you manipulate them? And of course, they are manipulated. There's a huge battle over a community's memory because it determines where a community goes next. My new novel is in that territory. The novel, The Buried Giant, is set a long, long time ago in Britain. Not England, Britain. It can't be England because the English hadn't arrived at this point. It takes place in that period. It's a very mysterious period in British history after the Romans have withdrawn their empire. So the Romans have left Britain, but the Anglo-Saxons haven't quite settled the country yet. They're arriving in little groups, and they're basically an ethnic minority. There are native Britons, the people who were there under the Romans. So it's set in that period. A lot of kind of the nasty civil wars have kind of come to an end, but there's kind of tension between the different communities for kind of ethnic dominance. That's the setting of The Buried Giant. And yes, I did a lot of kind of very scholarly research to try and get this period accurate. And I discovered, amongst other things, that in those days, if you go back that far, I'm talking about 500 AD, around there, 490 AD. In Britain, there were still ogres. Ogres were still native to the country in those days. These ogres were still roaming about, and the people of that time thought this was perfectly normal. I mean, they didn't like the ogres particularly, but they didn't think they were particularly distressing things to encounter. For instance, there's a great Old English poem called Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. And it's a great kind of story poem, but the best part of it for me is when Sir Gawain leaves Arthur's kind of castle and goes galloping off into the English countryside, and to his distress he finds there are no inns or hotels. He's got to sleep on rocks and things like this. And one of the kind of everyday hazards he encounters is that some ghastly ogre will sort of come panting after him up a hill or something, and he has to run away. And so that's the Britain that really captured my imagination, and I thought, I'm going to have to set a novel in this place.